Hit it.
Welcome to the Test Talks podcast, the place to go to geek out on software testing. And now your host, whose mission is to help you succeed with test automation, Joe Colantonio.
Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of Test Talks. Today we're going to be test talking with Larry Goddard all about creating a classy automation framework. Larry will discuss some JavaScript-related testing tools that have helped him to create tests for UI, API, and visual validations, as well as generate reports and run tests in continuous integration. So listen up and discover how to improve your JavaScript-based automation testing framework efforts. Check it out. Test Talks is sponsored by the fantastic folks at Sauce Labs, the cloud-based automated testing platform that eliminates the need to maintain your own Selenium grid and test infrastructure. Try it for free today. Visit testtalks.com and click on the Sign Up Now link under the homepage sponsor section. Hey Larry, welcome to Test Talks.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It's my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So I've been following you for a while. You joined the Guild, and you have a lot of great insight within the Automation Guild Slack community. And one of the things I noticed was you were talking about frameworks. So today, that's what I'd like to talk about, all your experience with automation frameworks and your experience creating UI, API, BDD tests. But before we get into it, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
About me. I don't know. I'm a tech junkie, as you would call it. Been playing around with tech since you used to plug your cartridge into your keyboard to do stuff, and went on and do systems engineering. That was thing, and then after a while, a couple of years and that, and then through some fate and a luck of a friend, get into the whole testing thing. And I must admit, up to that point, I didn't even realize it had something called testing. So I got into it, and over the years, you move from standard off-the-shelf products to open source things, and outside of that, I'm a keen rugby player. Don't play anymore. Stop about 5 years now, but I played for like umpteens of years. I think like 25 years nonstop. I went through the whole ropes with it. And if I wasn't playing sports and I wasn't, I just like to chill. So that's about me, really.
Very cool. So how long have you been testing for then?
I've been testing for roughly, let me see, 2000. So this year will be 18 years.
And how did you get into automation from testing?
I got into automation, like I say, from over the time, it was all manual testing, and then it had, and it was all Mercury Interactive, Load Runner, Win Runner, Test Director, and stuff like that. And that's how I started into it. And, just progressively move into open source, and now, yeah.
So you mentioned a lot of automation tools there, so you have a lot of experience. So I'm just curious to know, how do you choose an automation tool to use?
I make my choice based on what not what I'm actually testing, but based on what the tech stack is, where I'm working at that point in time. I try to keep my test tools in line with what the devs using, so it's easy to get, only for it's easy to get help. I put it like that, so I'm doing something and you're stuck. You can readily get help from one of the devs and them to whatever it is you're working with. So that's how I kind of think that's previously, but now, because I started getting into frameworks and things, I kind of went down the road of choosing a particular language and kind of sticking to that unless it's something specific for a client.
So what language did you stick with, or did you decide to choose on?
JavaScript, Node.js.
And why is that?
Because I did a look, and I tell myself, all these, I look at it from the point of all these the new startups and all these things, they all uses this technology stack, React.js and all these weird and wonderful stuff. And yet you find all the QA frameworks out there was mainly Java based. And one of the problems was you either had to learn Java, or the testing was completely isolated from everything else. So if the QA get hit by a truck tomorrow, all the testing stopped, because none of the actual people, the devs and they know Java anyway, because they're into this whole, and that's why I decided to go down that JavaScript route.
Cool. Yeah, for some reason, I notice everyone that's into JavaScript rather than using the Selenium JavaScript binding, they tend to use WebDriver IO. And I believe that's what you decided to as well. I'm just curious to know why you chose WebDriver IO.
Oh, yeah, I chose WebDriver IO because of the way it is. I used to use like just, Selenium WebDriver like everybody else. And then I was doing a job for Cambridge Assessment, Cambridge University. And I was looking at how I could do this and get all the help with less time as possible. And one of the things I realized, I started looking around, and one of the things I realized with WebDriver IO, and I only know about it at that point when I was actually looking, it was that it's the way the commands are. It's very super intelligent, for want of a better word. Whereas in normal Selenium WebDriver, you'll have to say, find element by CSS or ID or by name or partial text. With WebDriver IO, it's just a simple driver.click, and you put the element, and in the background, it will decide based on the element you pass. In the background, it will decide if that's a CSS or if it's a partial text or, one of those, like XPath or whatever it is, it works it out, like say, for itself. So, and that's one of the things, because like I tell people, I'm lazy. So anything to help, anything to help with the progress is neat. So, and not only that, it makes your test a little stronger as well, because you wouldn't like grab a ID and pass it as a name, because your test will just automatically break anyway. So it avoids all them things. So that's one of the reasons why I went down the WebIO route.
So is this something you would recommend to someone if they were looking for a way to automate their browsers?
Yeah. At the moment, I recommend. I'm a what we call a staunch advocate of WebDriver IO. I recommend it to everybody that I talk to and I come in contact with, where they're asking for some feedback on automation. And I also, one of the things is that I don't just recommend it, because I tend to kind of like explain why they would use that over the normal Selenium WebDriver.
Very cool. So is there any functionality of WebDriver IO you don't think a lot of people know about that they should? They're like, wow, if they only knew it did this. I mean, what you already mentioned already is pretty awesome, but is there anything else that it gives you?
Yeah. One of the things with I haven't actually used it in any project as yet, but one of the things with WebDriver IO is the give you the ability to work with shadow DOMs. And that shadow DOM is a big thing with Selenium and everybody else at the moment. I actually created two little functions that would grab the main DOM and then find the shadow DOM in it and pull whatever ID you need from it there. It was a kind of a workaround. But right now, with this latest release of WebIO, they literally put it in there, so you can now literally call your shadow DOM directly.
So the folks that don't know, though, what is a shadow DOM? Because I've heard this a few times, and it seems very complicated to automate.
Let me see. To use my words, it's where you have your DOM, where you find all your elements and stuff, but then inside that it is something like React. So it generates like a sub DOM of the main DOM. It's not readily available for a point and click. I mean, that's about the best way I could actually put it without actually looking up the true meaning of it.
So you have WebDriver IO, and if you look on GitHub, you have this all documented as your framework. What I thought was interesting also, you used a tool called Resemble.js for visual regression. And I've never heard of Resemble.js. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Funny enough, when I was coming to it, I was looking at, you have API tools and all these commercially available things. And one of the things I was looking at is, how could I have an open source application that will allow me to build in something into it that, like, so when you, the user, decide, oh, that's looking like a cool framework, let me use it. It will remain open source, meaning you won't have to get an account anywhere and pay any money for anything. And I was just doing a search, really, and trying to figure out what could do what and what can do where. And that's how I came up with Resemble.js. I looked at what it could do. I tried it out, run a simple test on what it could do. And then I kind of write a little wrapper around what I wanted to do. And there you go. So, like I said, I didn't know about it prior to that at all.
Very cool. So can you give an example of what one of those wrappers would look like? What do you use Resemble.js for? Like an example on a real application.
It's a Resemble.js is a little tool. I wouldn't say a little tool. It's one of those little things that what it does is do image comparison. It allows you to take an image and compare it, and then take another image of that same page at a later date and compare it with the previous one that you took. That's what it does in a nutshell. So I use it for, like I said, visual regression, and you still have, it allows you to like block out, you can block out a part of the, let's say like, let's for argument's sake, a clock, a live clock, which means every time you take a picture of the page, the time will be different. So that means that image will fail. So you can literally block that clock out by passing in the XY coordinates of where the clock is on the page, and it will grab an image of the page and put a black spot over the clock, so it will ignore that. So it's just an image comparison little tool.
So how reliable is it? And have you noticed if it's flaky, or is it pretty good, pretty solid?
Well, so far for what I'm doing, at the moment I work for Oxford University Press, and a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is on the platform, my maths platform. What that is in itself is an application for school kids to do homework, maths homework. So they have lessons and everything in there, and I'm using it to test that in terms of, what the page look like when you now load it up. If you put some marks on it and you come back to it, if the marks are still there. And so far, in terms of 100%, I would say it's not all that like Appy Tools. It's nowhere near to Appy Tools, but it does what do you want it to do in terms. And I mean, there are a lot of tweaking you could do with the pixels and get it as close as possible. But yeah, it's not as, like my good friend Angie Jones, it's not as good as that. But it does what it do. I mean, if you want to really get down into, I wouldn't use it for, like say, some big industrial I wouldn't use it as a NASA project.
So it just sounds like if you don't have a budget and you need to do a quick and dirty visual validation test, it's maybe something that might be helpful.
Yeah, that I cannot consider that at all.
Very cool. So another part of your framework is API testing, and you chose.
Yeah, I chose request promise.
And why is that?
Again, I choose that because I look at a lot of things like Chakram and a few others. A lot of them is written either in the Java base or inside the JavaScript base. They're more for Mocha, to use Mocha. But because I run in Cucumber and I run in WebIO, but from a standalone array, I wanted something that could have plugged in to use Cucumber. So I could write my test in Cucumber and still test it and then call it, so straight out. So I have a feature file that say, I don't know, get this and tell me what the results and the response time and all these things. And for me, it was one of the best ones that I came across, and I sampled a lot of them. And it was one of the best ones that I came across in terms of a lot of things to it, in terms of what it could do, how easy it is to do it, and the different ways you could pass in your payload and everything. So hence the reason why I use that.
Cool. So I think another thing that people struggle with, and you mentioned you're using BDD, is for some reason they can't wrap their heads around that BDD is not just for browser tests. So you just mentioned 3 different technologies, and it sounds like they're all within your Cucumber BDD framework. So is there any way that you run a test flow that touches each of those levels of an application, the UI, the API, and a visual validation test? Are they completely separate from one another?
No, actually, no. What it is barring the API, I write a standard BDD script that say, while I'm Joe and I want to go and see my account that I supposed to have $100, and a standard test like that, and I test whilst I doing a normal functional test. I doing a visual at the same time, so I could visually check every single page that you go on. So I could check a page for every single, like say, component that on that page that you're going to interact with and grab a picture of it. Like I say, it's just like in terms of that, it's just like you're using Appy Tools, but it's just like on a more miniature scale. So it's the same concept. So I will write a test to do all my normal functional testing, and I would put the image checking inside of that at the same time. The only thing runs kind of separate, but at the same time, to want a better word, is the API testing, which means I could write a test that talks to the API, and I hate to do this, but I can do it, where you grab the result from the API and pass that as the data for your functional test. So, and all inside within the same flow. It's not So you're going to be running one separate from the next. Or you could literally have API tests and functional tests, all of them mixed together and running as one test suite.
Nice. So how do you decide how you're going to make your test? If you're going to make it a UI test or an API test or a visual validation test?
Well, it all depends on what are actually testing at the moment. What's my requirements. Most of my visual tests, most of them are attached to some functional tests. I run them in at the same time, or I have separate tests. Again, it depends on. So just to draw an example, on the MyMaths website, you have images where the student log in, and let's say they're doing trigs. They log in and they have a set of formulas on the page, and the way the page is constructed, or I could just go directly into it and grab an image of that page to make sure that all the images that they're supposed to see is there. Just do a straight without having. Well, I'm not gonna test anything else but doing a visual check of the pages. So it all depends on what it is I'm looking at. I would write a test accordingly. I might have to fill out a form. And the best way to do that in a sense of what I'm doing is via the API. So I'll write an API test to fill the form out and then grab the results from somewhere else.
Cool. So Larry, are you an independent contractor, or are you a consultant, or do you work full time for the school?
At the moment, I'm a full-time employee of a consultant firm, and I work at Oxford University Press. That is at the moment, but in the next month, I'll be back contracting. I'll be back working for myself.
All right. So how do you go into a company and say, this is the approach of testing we're going to use? Is that something that they tell you, hey, we're hiring you, you just automate this, or do you actually have input?
In some instances, like although I work for a company at the moment, when I went to the Oxford University Press to work for them, I think I could go back a little bit. When I went to work for Cambridge University, which is Cambridge Assessment, when I got there, they had a particular problem, and I was given a green slate, more or less a clean slate to put something in place and to get things done. And so there are times where I would actually go sit with the people, find out what it is they're trying to achieve, and come up with a strategy for it. And in some instances, I would come and I would just work with what you have, because you already have something in place. So I would just take that and enhance on it, or just follow it as according. It all depends on what the situation is at any given time.
Awesome. Yeah, the reason why I ask is you're also using BDD, and a lot of times teams will use BDD to try to help with their communication as well. Is that did you start this project and they already were using Cucumber, or is that something that you recommended using?
Okay, yeah. No. When I started, I could come back to Oxford University Press. When I started there over a year ago, no, they were all waterfall. This all big stuff, and there was now kind of making a push for agile. And so when I went in this instance, I was kind of lucky in the sense that I ended up on a greenfield project, as they like to call them, where it didn't have anything. So I actually came up with a test strategy, passed it around the people who needed to see it, and they all agree and buy into it. And then what I went on to do and doing now at the moment is I am now doing workshops for the business analysts and them to pick up the whole BDD thing. So at the moment, you still have a lot of only the most recent projects, like the one I started and a few others, actually have the whole Cucumber BDD thing going. And a lot of the others, they don't. So I do a lot of workshops at the moment where I'm showing them and talking them through how to do it, how to write proper BDD feature, how to write proper feature files and things like that.
Cool. Hey, so when you're doing those workshops, is there any common things you see over and over again? You're like, wow, everyone always stumbles on the same exact thing.
I have to say, so far, all the workshops that I have put, because the people I'm working with, they really have no idea. In other words, nobody that have come to one of these sessions so far came with a preconceived idea of what it is and how it's supposed to work. I'm like, God, I'm telling you, yeah, that's the apple there. That's the apple. If you eat that apple, this is what's going to happen. But no. Right? So everybody, so they buy into it. And I must admit, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I am using Cucumber's tutorial stack and a tailor to suit, to suit the class, to suit the people I'm working with and the time frame in which I'm doing it. But yeah, they didn't come with no conceived notion of what it was. So it's a kind of a novelty thing to a lot of them in the sense. So, and things like that, and, like where you would save your feature files and things like that. So it's all a whole new concept to a lot of them.
Cool. So I guess that's even harder then. If it's a new concept, do you even have to start, this is what automation is, and this is when you should use it, when you don't use it?
Not at that level, because a lot of them know what automation, well, they have an idea of what automation is and stuff, but what they don't do is they hear about BDD and they hear about Cucumber and they hear about Selenium and they hear about, WebDriver and all these things, but they never actually had to use it in any way at all. So in that sense, it's a lot easy for me to have to talk to them and explain things to them. And so you find a lot of the questions that would come back is, and what about if I write X, how would that affect it? And just little things like that. And, as you know, once you start with the give me when, then, and, but, those are the keywords. So once you start with that, everything after that is what the test is going to look at and ignore the whole give me when, then, and but, and all the other little intricate ones along the way. So yes, it's pretty, let's say, not too technical, but more, this is how you would write it so that I would understand it. So, and I don't have to go into, okay, you write it. Now, when you write it, this is what I will do with it. I don't have to go through that. Thank God for it.
So who runs the test? Do you have it set up in Jenkins or in DevOps, or how does that work?
It all depends on the project. So my project in particular is fully CI. Complete CI integrated from the developer checking a branch to it going out into productions. A complete CI pipeline I'm working on. At the moment in my project, I'm using Circle CI. Well, that's what they use, so that's why I use that. I use Circle CI and of course Browser Stack for multi-testing along the way. So that's what we use. It's a fully CI integrated thing.
Cool. How about reporting? Does WebDriver IO have any reporting in it?
They have a few, WebDriver IO have a few reporters built in, but I don't like none of them. So I just use one called Winston. It's a nice little thing. What it does, it grabs all the data and saves it as a JSON, but it also generates a HTML file with a nice little graph on it, and it separates out all your functions and your features, your features and your scenarios and all these steps on a take image. And you can do a lot with it. Like I just have it taking an image. If it failed, I have it grabbing that image and passing it into the report at the same time. So that's what I use as a reporting tool. But yes, WebDriver IO have some reporting tools in them, but I think they have not in it. It have a lot of integration with Allo, I think it's called. Yeah, and a few others. But I just, like I say, I look around and see what it have and what works best for me and what I like and stuff like that. So yes, I just use Winston at the moment.
So Larry, a lot of times people are like, oh gosh, what tool do I use? Where do I get started? There's so many options that they don't even get started. So what inspired you to create this framework?
What it was the situation at hand at the moment. And I was faced with a let's say a kind of impossible task. I wanted, the company wanted something where they could reduce of course, the whole, when they do a major release, it used to take, 2 a week to do a regression test before they could push things live. And they also had a next unique thing. What they wanted was something that could compare the PDFs, which would be your exam papers. Because, you have in exams, you have people that do maths exams. So you have people do it in the morning and people do it in the afternoon. But it's the same paper, just different questions. And that was one of the little unique things. And I started looking around and trying to figure out, what I could use. And I started, initially I looked at C# because that's what a lot of people was using. It was a .NET environment with a lot of other bits. And I find it was too cumbersome, especially when coming to make changes. You have to compile and recompile and too much nightmare. And that's what they got me into it. And I built it. And funny enough, when you build something working for somebody, it's their property, it's their intellectual property, which was one of those things. But then I was working at Cambridge Assessment, which is Cambridge University, and my boss at the time said, wow, this was really good. This is really, really impressive. What you should do is make it open source. And I will admit, up to that point, I didn't even know what open source was in the scheme of things. I mean, I know what open source was in terms of what I use it, yeah, but I didn't know what it was in the scheme of things where I could make something that is open source. So I said yes at the time, and I said, yeah, sure, I will do that. Definitely do that. And then, of course, I went and do a little research. Oh, how do you do this? And that's what actually make me decide to do it. And what it was just a plain thing. And then as time goes by and I learn about different technologies and different things that you could do with a framework, I start adding bits to it and making it one whole thing that could do, I won't say everything, but like in my case, I could do my APIs, I could do visual regression, and then my normal functional and regression testing, all inside the one framework. So that's what it was that inspired me to do this.
What's the name of the framework? Is it Klassi?
Yeah, Klassi. I know. The problem is Klassi, that's a whole different thing by itself. Klassi is, I would call it my brand. I actually trademark the word Klassi with a logo to go with it. It's just a word I heard many, many, many years ago. It's a German word, by the way. And that is why I started saying, you know what, because I already have this and I had to come up with a name for it, I just decided to give it, at first I originally call it WebDriver IO Cucumber JS. That's my original name for it. And then I say, wait a minute, I have my whole Klassi brand. Why don't I brand it with put my brand on it? And then I named it klassi-cucumber.js, and then just like a couple of weeks or a month ago, or just recently here, I literally name it just klassi-js. So that was the whole thing behind that.
Nice. Yeah, I love branding. That's a great idea. Okay, Larry, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give someone to help them with their automation efforts? And let us know the best way to find or contact you.
What I would say is, one piece of advice I will give a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people where automation is concerned, is that is a little saying. I can't remember who said it, but this automation should only be used to enhance testing and not replace it. That's one piece of advice I would like to leave for a lot of people, because a lot of people have the concept that when you start to do automation, manual testing and all these kind of things goes out the window. But that's not true. That's not so. It's a big misconception they have, and they feel automation is going to take over the world. That's one thing I would like to say. And if you can contact me, you can contact me via Twitter, or again through my personal email, which is larryg@klassitech.co.uk. You can follow my brand on Twitter and on Facebook and everything. So I'm very much contactable through most of the media.
Thank you, Larry, for your automation awesomeness. For links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testtalks.com/243. And while you're there, make sure to click on that sign up for a free trial link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Lab's awesome products and services. So that's it for this episode of Test Talks. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed in creating automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Talks podcast. Head on over to www.testtalks.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and other automation awesomeness.